The needle went still in Margaret Ellery's fingers. Someone was at the door, not the usual knock, not Alice's quick double rap, nor the heavy fist of Mr. Crabbe the landlord come sniffing for rent before it was due. This was a single, careful knock. The knock of someone unsure whether they had the right to knock at all. Meg set down the bodice she'd been finishing, ivory silk, seed pearls, a rush order for a wedding that wasn't hers, and crossed the narrow workshop floor. Candlelight caught the dust, drifting between the work tables. Outside, Spitalfields was already dark at 5:30, the winter cold pressing its palm flat against the window pane. She opened the door to no one, only a folded square of paper, tucked beneath a small parcel wrapped in brown twine, left on the step like an offering someone was ashamed to give in person. She looked up and down the lane, empty. A carriage, a good one, the kind that didn't belong on this street, was just turning the corner, wheels vanishing into the fog. Inside the paper, a banknote, enough to cover December's rent twice over. No name, no explanation. Only, at the bottom, in a hand she recognized, because she had seen it once before, on a card left with a bolt of fine wool 6 months ago, 3 words: "Keep your dignity." Meg's hand tightened around the paper. She had a very good idea who this was, and she had absolutely no idea why he was doing it. If you want to know why a duke is secretly saving a seamstress's workshop, and what happens when his fiancée humiliates her in front of the entire ballroom, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because you will not want to miss how this story ends. Drop a comment. Do you think the Duke should break the engagement? Let me know below. I read every single one. Like this video if you're already rooting for Meg. Meg didn't sleep well that night, though the rent money sat folded safely in her mother's old tea tin. She rose before dawn as always, lit the stove, and had the workshop warm by the time Alice Denny arrived, cheeks pink from the cold, a basket of thread spools balanced on her hip. "You look as though you didn't sleep, Miss Ellery." "I slept fine." Meg didn't look up from her work table. "Mind the hem on the Ashworth order. I want it perfect." Alice's eyes went wide. "The Ashworth order, as in Lady Cordelia Fenwick Hale wants a gown for her betrothal ball, and she has chosen us, God knows why, and we are going to give her the finest work this workshop has ever produced." Meg said it briskly, though her stomach had tightened the moment the commission arrived 3 days prior. A society client of that rank could make a small workshop's reputation, or unmake it entirely, with a single careless word in the right drawing room. They needed the money. Winter bills didn't care about pride. Across London, in a house considerably larger and considerably colder in its own way, Julian Ashworth Vane, 7th Duke of Rathmere, stood at his study window watching the fog roll off the Thames and wondered, not for the first time, why he had agreed to marry a woman he did not particularly like. "The Mills quarterly figures, Your Grace." His steward, Thomas Rayburn, set the ledger on the desk without being asked twice. Rayburn had served the family for 11 years and had opinions he mostly kept to himself, mostly. And profitable, as they've been since we changed suppliers. Rayburn hesitated. The wool merchant recommended the new source. Small operation, Spitalfields. Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm aware. I only mention it, Your Grace, because Lady Cordelia has apparently commissioned a gown from a Spitalfields dressmaker for the betrothal ball. I wondered if you knew which one." Julian said nothing for a long moment, watching the fog. He knew exactly which one. Cordelia Fenwick Hale did not choose vendors by accident. "She's cheap, Mother, and desperate, which means she'll work herself half to death to please us," she said, turning a teacup in her fingers, as her mother, Mrs. Prudence Hale, nodded approvingly from the settee. "And if the gown isn't flawless, which it won't be, because no one from a street like that could possibly manage silk brocade, I shall have every reason to say so. Publicly, loudly, it will be marvelous." Cordelia, her mother's voice carried the particular patience of a woman managing a volatile investment. "The point is the marriage, not the theatre." "The point," Cordelia said sweetly, is that everyone will be watching me that night, wondering whether the Duke's little arrangement is a love match or a rescue of our family's finances. I intend to give them something else to watch instead." 3 streets away, Meg was taking measurements for a different client entirely. The Dowager Duchess Eleanor, Julian's grandmother, who had specifically requested the girl who mends things properly, not the fashionable ones who ruin good fabric with fussy trim. The Dowager sat very upright, sharp-eyed, watching Meg work with open interest. "You have a steady hand, Miss Ellery." "Thank you, Your Grace. My grandson thinks so too, I understand." Meg's hand paused over the measuring tape only a fraction of a second. "I couldn't say, Your Grace." "No," the Dowager said, with the ghost of a smile. "I don't suppose you could." It was 2 days later that Julian appeared at the workshop himself, ostensibly to inspect the wool his mills had supplied for a separate order, though Rayburn, waiting outside with the carriage, knew better than to believe that entirely. Meg looked up from her work table, startled, then composed. "Your Grace." "I wasn't expecting. I won't take much of your time." He glanced at the half-finished gown draped across the form near the window. Ivory silk shot through with silver thread, the stitching so fine it looked machine-perfect, though he knew perfectly well no machine had touched it. "That's for Lady Cordelia's ball." "It is. It's exceptional work." Something in Meg's expression sharpened. Not quite suspicion, not quite gratitude. "I'm told exceptional work is expected of women who need the commission badly enough." Julian met her eyes directly, the way few men of his rank bothered to do with a woman who sewed for her living. "I'd say it's expected of anyone who takes pride in what they do. That isn't the same thing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alice, pretending to sort thread in the corner, watched them both with open curiosity. "Thank you for the wool, Your Grace," Meg said finally, careful. "It's the finest I've worked with." "I'm glad it serves you well." He hesitated at the door, as though there were more he might say, and didn't. "Good day, Miss Ellery." He left before she could ask him the question sitting on her tongue, the one about handwriting and banknotes and 3 words she hadn't been able to stop thinking about since. The gown was finished 4 days before the ball, and it was, without exaggeration, the finest thing Meg's workshop had ever produced. Silver thread caught the light like frost on a window pane. Every seam lay flat and true. Alice had cried a little, seeing it hung complete, and Meg had allowed herself one small private moment of pride before folding it into layers of tissue for delivery. That evening, alone in the workshop after Alice had gone home, Meg took out the 3 notes she'd received over the past 6 months, each one accompanying money that had arrived exactly when the workshop needed it most, each one signed with nothing but a short phrase in the same careful hand. She laid them beside the note the Duke had left with the wool merchant's card, the one authorizing the account in her name. The handwriting matched. She'd known it for weeks. She simply hadn't let herself say it aloud, even to herself, because saying it aloud meant asking why, and she wasn't certain she was ready for any answer he might give. "Keep your dignity." She thought of him standing in her workshop, looking at Cordelia's gown with something unreadable in his face. She thought of the wool, finer than anything she could otherwise have afforded, arriving with no explanation at all. Across the city, Cordelia was having a rather different evening. The dressmaker delivered it herself, she told her mother, turning the gown over in critical hands, hunting for a flaw, and finding, to her visible irritation, none. "It's better than I expected, which is a problem." "Is it?" Mrs. Hale raised an eyebrow. "If the work is flawless, I've nothing to complain about." Cordelia's mouth thinned. "Unless I complain anyway." "Cordelia, people believe what they're told to believe, Mother, provided it's said with enough confidence in front of enough witnesses." She smiled, and it did not reach her eyes. "I'll simply say the hem was uneven, or the beading was crooked before I had it quietly redone. No one checks. They only remember the scandal." Mrs. Hale said nothing to discourage her. That, more than anything, told Cordelia she had permission to proceed. The night of the ball, Rathmere House blazed with candlelight from every window. Carriages queued 3 deep along the drive. and Julian stood at the top of the grand staircase beside his grandmother, watching London's finest families ascend in their jewels and borrowed confidence, and felt, as he often did at these occasions, entirely apart from all of it. "You look like a man attending his own funeral," the Dowager Duchess observed, not quietly. "I feel rather like one." "Then do something about it." She fixed him with the same sharp look she'd given him since he was 7 years old and had broken a vase and tried to blame the dog. "You've never been a coward, Julian. Don't start tonight." He didn't have time to ask what she meant. Cordelia arrived at his side in the ivory silk gown, silver thread catching the chandelier light exactly as Meg had intended it to, and for one unguarded moment, Julian thought, genuinely thought, she looks beautiful, and none of it is hers. The thought unsettled him more than he expected. "Your Grace." Cordelia took his arm with practiced ease, smiling out at the assembled guests, as though she'd rehearsed the exact angle of her chin. "Everyone's looking. Isn't it wonderful?" "Wonderful," he echoed, and did not mean it. The evening moved as these evenings always did. Introductions, orchestra, the careful choreography of who spoke to whom, and in what order. Julian found himself watching the door more than the dance floor, and told himself he wasn't waiting for anything in particular. Then, near 10 o'clock, Meg arrived, not as a guest, but summoned by a note from Cordelia's maid, claiming an urgent alteration was needed before the receiving line. Meg had come with her sewing kit in hand, still in her plain grey workday dress, stepping into a ballroom full of silk and diamonds, utterly unaware she had just walked into a trap built entirely for her. Cordelia saw her enter from across the room and smiled the smile of a woman about to get exactly what she wanted. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, raising her voice just enough to draw the nearest cluster of guests toward her. "How fortunate! The dressmaker has come herself. Perhaps she can explain to everyone why she thought this was acceptable work for a duke's betrothal." The room quieted the way rooms do when they sense a spectacle beginning. Not all at once, but in a ripple, conversations dying mid-sentence, heads turning toward the sound of Cordelia's voice. She held up the hem of the ivory gown with 2 fingers, as though it might soil her. "Look here. Uneven stitching. And this beading. Crooked, see? I noticed it the moment I put it on." She let the silk fall and turned to the gathering crowd with an expression of practiced distress. "I paid handsomely for craftsmanship, and instead, I received the work of someone entirely out of her depth." Meg felt the blood leave her face, but she did not look away, and she did not apologize for something she knew was untrue. "Lady Cordelia, if there is a flaw, I would be glad to see it and correct it myself, but I finished every seam of that gown personally, and I stand behind every stitch." "Are you calling me a liar?" Cordelia's voice sharpened, delighted at the opening. "In front of all these witnesses." Whispers moved through the crowd. Mrs. Hale watched from the edge of the room with quiet satisfaction. This was proceeding exactly as planned. Julian had been standing near the orchestra, close enough to hear everything, and something in him, some old habit of silence, of letting cruelty pass because objecting was undignified, because it wasn't his place, because it had never once cost him anything to simply say nothing, finally, completely, gave way. He crossed the ballroom floor. "Lady Cordelia." His voice wasn't raised, but it carried, the way voices do when a room is already listening for the next thing to happen. "I'd like to see this floor myself." Cordelia's confidence flickered, just slightly. "Julian, there's no need. There's every need if you're accusing someone of poor craftsmanship in front of half of London." He took the hem himself, turned it toward the candlelight, and examined stitching so precise it might have been drawn with a ruler. "I don't see a flaw, Cordelia. I see the finest needlework I've encountered in years." He let the fabric fall and looked up, meeting her eyes squarely, which isn't surprising to me, because I know this work. I know this dressmaker's work quite well. "You know her?" Cordelia's laugh came out thin, uncertain now. "I know her workshop has been supplied with wool from my own mills for the past 6 months, Julian said, and the room went very still. "I know because I arranged it myself. after I watched her turn away a debt collector rather than let an elderly seamstress in her employ lose a week's wages. I know because I have quietly ensured her workshop survives the winter. Not out of pity, Cordelia, but because I have rarely met anyone, of any rank, who deserved it more. A murmur swept the ballroom, sharp with astonishment. So when you stand here, Julian continued, quieter now but no less clear, mocking work I have personally verified as flawless, in fabric that came from my own mills, in front of every family whose good opinion your engagement to me depends upon. You are not simply insulting a dressmaker, Cordelia. You are insulting my judgment, my business, and a woman I respect a great deal more than I have, until this moment, had the courage to say aloud. Cordelia's face had gone the colour of the silk she stood in. Mrs. Hale had stopped smiling entirely. Julian, Cordelia said, low, urgent, you're embarrassing yourself. No, he said. For 6 months I've been embarrassing myself. Quietly funding kindness I was too much a coward to acknowledge in daylight. Tonight, at least, I've stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that changes a room permanently. Meg stood frozen amid the whispers, the weight of 200 eyes suddenly on her, on Julian, on the space between them that had just been made public in the cruelest and most honest way possible. She understood, all at once, exactly why the wool had come from his mills. Exactly whose hand had written, "Keep your dignity," 3 separate times over 6 long, difficult months. Mrs. Hale recovered first, seizing her daughter's arm. Cordelia, we're leaving. Julian, Cordelia's composure cracked entirely now, something almost desperate beneath the anger. You cannot mean to embarrass our families over a seamstress. I don't intend to embarrass anyone further tonight, Julian said, and there was no cruelty in it, only a tiredness that had been building for years. But I won't marry a woman who mistakes cruelty for cleverness, Cordelia. I should have said so months ago. I'm saying it now. He turned, formally, to the assembled guests, to the aunts and uncles, and rival dukes and whispering matrons who would carry this story to every drawing room in London by morning. I apologize for the disruption to the evening. The engagement between myself and Lady Cordelia Fenwick Hale is at an end. The Dowager Duchess Eleanor, watching from near the staircase, allowed herself the smallest, most satisfied smile of the entire evening. Cordelia was led from the ballroom by her mother, her face a mask of fury and humiliation in equal measure, the ivory gown, flawless and now infamous, trailing silver thread behind her like a verdict. Meg remained where she stood, sewing kit still in hand, entirely unsure what to do with a room now looking at her with something closer to admiration than pity. Julian crossed to her, and for the first time that evening, lowered his voice to something meant only for her. I should have told you myself, months ago. I'm sorry it happened like this. You could have simply signed your name, Meg said, though there was no real anger in it, only the last threads of shock loosening into something gentler. I could have. He glanced down at the wreckage of the evening around them, the whispering guests, his grandmother's approving silence, the future he'd just publicly dismantled. I think I was more afraid of being thanked than of being wrong. Winter passed differently that year. Meg's workshop did not merely survive. It thrived, on the strength of an honest contract Julian insisted upon, fair wages, fair terms, and no anonymity required, because there was, he said, nothing left to hide. Alice began formal training with a master embroiderer in the spring, a small kindness Meg suspected, correctly, traced back to Rathmere House, though this time the note that accompanied it bore an actual signature. London talked about the broken engagement for exactly as long as London talks about anything, a few weeks of delighted scandal before the next one arrived to replace it. Cordelia and her mother retreated to the countryside to manage what remained of their circumstances. Julian never spoke of them unkindly, only plainly, when asked. He visited the workshop more often than strict necessity required. Meg noticed. She said nothing about it, and neither did he, though there was a particular quality to the silence between them now. Unhurried, unafraid, entirely unlike the silence he'd kept for so long before. You never did explain the handwriting, she told him once. Needle paused mid-stitch, watching him examine a bolt of wool with far more interest than any duke required. Some things, Julian said, are better shown than explained. She didn't press him further. She had, after all, learned to recognize dignity when she saw it, in a banknote left without a name, in a room gone silent for the right reasons, in a man who had finally stopped mistaking silence for peace. Some stories end at the altar. This one simply began, at last, to be honest.